The Little Boy Who Saved People. The Little Boy Who Saved People? Leo was not like the other kids in his village, Oakhaven. While they chased chickens, climbed the ancient oak trees, or played elaborate games of hide-and-seek among the winding forest paths, Leo preferred to sit on the worn wooden bench outside his grandmother's cottage, watching. He watched the patterns of the clouds, the way the wind rustled through the wheat fields, and, most importantly, the people. He watched how their shoulders slumped when they carried bad news, how their eyes lit up when they shared a secret, and the subtle shift in their walk when they were worried. Leo was only 8, but he had an old soul, a quiet observer of the human condition. Oakhaven was nestled deep in a valley, surrounded by the towering Whispering Mountains on one side, and the dense, ancient sunken forest on the other. It was a peaceful place, mostly, but its isolation also meant that help was far away when trouble struck. Leo's grandmother, Alara, a woman whose silver hair matched the mountain mist and whose eyes held the wisdom of generations, often sat beside him. "You see more than most, little one," she'd say, stroking his hair. "The world speaks to those who listen quietly." One sweltering summer afternoon, a silence fell over Oakhaven that was deeper than usual. The usual hum of activity, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the laughter from the stream, the distant bleating of sheep, had ceased. People moved with a strange, nervous energy, their faces tight with unspoken worry. Leo watched Farmer Jed, usually jovial, arguing heatedly with Mistress Maeve, the baker, her flour-dusted hands clenched into fists. He saw Old Man Silas, the village elder, pacing by the well, his gaze fixed on the sunken forest with an expression of deep fear. Leo approached Old Man Silas. "What is wrong, elder?" he asked, his voice soft. Silas sighed, a heavy sound. "The drought, Leo. It's been 3 months without rain. The well is almost dry. The stream has dwindled to a trickle, and the reservoir in the sunken forest, it's nearly empty. If we don't get rain or find another water source soon, Oakhaven will not survive the harvest." Leo knew this. He had seen the drooping crops, the thirsty animals, but there was something else in Silas's eyes, a fear that went beyond the drought. "And the forest?" Leo pressed. "Why do you keep looking at the sunken forest?" Silas hesitated, then lowered his voice. "The legends, child? The legends say that deep within the sunken forest, guarded by ancient spirits, lies the hidden spring. It flows endlessly, pure and cold. But no one who has gone in search of it has ever returned." A shiver ran down Leo's spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was from a spark of an idea. The village council met that evening, their voices low and grim. They talked of rationing, of abandoning Oakhaven, of desperate prayers for rain. No one spoke of the hidden spring. The legends were too dark, the forest too dangerous. Leo listened from outside, his little heart aching. He saw the despair in their faces, the resignation. And in that moment, he knew he had to do something. The whispers of the forest. The next morning, before the sun had fully chased the mist from the valley, Leo packed a small satchel. He took a water skin, half empty, as was everything in Oakhaven, a piece of dried bread, a small polished stone his grandmother had given him for luck, and a coil of thin, strong twine. He left a note for his grandmother, simply saying, "I am going for a walk. I will be back." He didn't want to worry her with the truth. He entered the sunken forest where the path was easiest to find, near the old stone bridge. The forest was an entirely different world inside. The light was dappled and green, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and unseen blossoms. The trees here were impossibly tall, their branches interlaced so tightly that only slivers of sunlight reached the forest floor. The legends of the sunken forest were many and varied. Some spoke of mischievous sprites who led travelers astray, others of enormous, silent beasts that watched from the shadows. Leo wasn't afraid of monsters. He was afraid of failing his village. He walked for hours, following animal trails, listening to the subtle shifts in the wind that rustled the leaves, trying to discern a direction. He remembered his grandmother's words. The world speaks to those who listen quietly. He listened to the forest. He heard the distant, mournful cry of a bird he didn't recognize, the rustle of tiny creatures in the undergrowth, and the steady, rhythmic drip, drip, drip that seemed to come from somewhere deep within. Water. He followed the sound. The forest grew denser, the trees twisting into gnarled, ancient shapes. He had to squeeze between thick roots, crawl under fallen logs, and push through curtains of thorny vines. The twine he had brought proved useful for marking his path on the trees, so he wouldn't get lost. Eventually, the drips turned into a murmur, and the murmur into a faint, rushing sound. He emerged into a small, hidden clearing. And there it was, the hidden spring. It wasn't a roaring waterfall, but a pool of impossibly clear, vibrant blue water, bubbling up from beneath a moss-covered rock. The water was so pure, it seemed to glow from within. Around it, the plants were lusher, greener, and the air was cool and sweet. Leo knelt and drank, the water like liquid starlight, instantly banishing the thirst that had parched his throat. He refilled his water skin, then looked around. The legends were true. The spring was hidden. The clearing was surrounded by a wall of enormous ancient rocks, disguised by thick moss and clinging vines. There was no obvious path leading here. But Leo also noticed something else. Among the rocks he saw faint carvings, ancient symbols etched into the stone, almost completely covered by time. He traced them with his finger. They looked like arrows, pointing in different directions, some toward the spring, some away. And then he saw a small, almost invisible opening in the rock face, a dark fissure barely wide enough for a child to crawl through. It wasn't a cave, but a narrow, winding passage. The legend hadn't mentioned a passage. Taking a deep breath, Leo squeezed into the opening. The path of courage. The passage was dark, cold, and smelled of damp earth and something strangely metallic. Leo had to crawl on his hands and knees, sometimes on his belly, for what felt like an eternity. He was afraid, but the thought of Oakhaven's parched fields kept him moving. He had tied the end of his twine to a sturdy root outside the passage, and he slowly unspooled it behind him, knowing it was his only way back. After what felt like miles, the passage widened slightly. He could stand again, and then he saw it. A faint glimmer of light ahead. He stumbled forward and emerged not back into the sunken forest, but into a completely different landscape. He was on the very edge of the Whispering Mountains, near a long-forgotten shepherd's trail. Below him, in the distant valley, he could see the tiny, familiar cluster of houses that was Oakhaven. The hidden spring didn't just bubble up in the sunken forest. It was connected to an underground river system that flowed through the mountains. The passage was an ancient, secret tunnel, a shortcut between the forest and the mountain slopes. And the faint metallic smell? It was the iron-rich minerals in the rock. Leo looked back at the passage opening, carefully concealed by a thicket of gnarled bushes and fallen leaves. No wonder no one had ever returned from the sunken forest. They didn't know the spring led out of it in a completely different direction. He now had two pieces of vital information: the location of the hidden spring, and a much safer, faster path to it from the mountainside, avoiding the dangers of the deep forest entirely. He quickly made his way down the mountain path, his heart pounding with excitement. When he finally reached the village, it was nearing sunset. His grandmother Alara was sitting on the bench, her face pale with worry, the note clutched in her hand. "Leo, my boy, where have you been?" she cried, pulling him into a fierce hug. "I went for a walk, grandmother," Leo said, breathless. "And I found something." He quickly gathered Old Man Silas, Farmer Jed, and Mistress Maeve. He told them about the hidden spring, and more importantly, about the hidden passage that led from the mountain, avoiding the dangerous heart of the sunken forest. He pulled out his water skin, offering them sips of the pure, life-giving water. Skepticism warred with hope in their eyes. Old Man Silas rubbed his chin. "A passage through the mountain? That's incredible, child. But how do we know it's safe? And how do we get the water to Oakhaven?" "The passage is safe," Leo insisted. "I marked it with twine. And the water, we can build an aqueduct. A small one, with wooden troughs, leading down the mountain right into our reservoir." Farmer Jed, who was also the village carpenter, suddenly looked up, his eyes alight. "An aqueduct? It's possible. If the spring is high enough, we could gravity feed it all the way down." That night, for the first time in weeks, hope filled Oakhaven. The next day, Leo led a small expedition of the strongest villagers, Farmer Jed, his sons, and a few others, up the mountain. He showed them the hidden passage, the twine still glinting faintly in the shadows. They cautiously explored it, confirming his account. Over the next few weeks, the entire village rallied. Farmer Jed and his sons worked tirelessly, cutting timber from the forest edge, shaping it into sturdy troughs. Others hauled stones and mixed mortar to build supports. The women and younger children cooked meals for the workers and brought fresh water from the spring via buckets, which now flowed freely from the mountain passage. Leo, with his quiet observations, was invaluable. He pointed out the best angles for the troughs, remembering the natural slopes of the land, guiding the flow of the water. He drew crude maps in the dirt, showing where the water would need to turn, where it would need to drop. Finally, one glorious afternoon, with the entire village gathered, the last section of the wooden aqueduct was carefully put into place. Old Man Silas, his hands trembling, poured a bucket of water from the hidden spring into the start of the trough. The clear, shimmering liquid flowed down, gurgling and rushing, making its way along the carefully constructed path. A cheer erupted as the first pure, cool water from the hidden spring spilled into Oakhaven's parched reservoir, slowly filling it. The sight was met with tears, laughter, and shouts of joy. Oakhaven was saved. The crops would drink, the animals would thrive, and the village would endure. Old Man Silas knelt before Leo, taking the boy's small, dirt-stained hands in his own. "You little Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you saved us all. You saw what we couldn't, and you had the courage to follow the whispers of the world." Leo, looking at the full reservoir, at the smiling faces of his people, felt a warmth spread through his chest that was far more satisfying than any praise. He hadn't fought a monster, or performed a grand feat of strength. He had simply listened. He had observed, and in doing so, the quiet little boy had brought life back to his home. From that day on, whenever a problem arose in Oakhaven, people didn't rush to shout solutions. They went to the small wooden bench outside Alara's cottage, where Leo, the quiet observer, still sat, watching and listening, ready to find the hidden path.